Out of the 44 characters in Dragon Ball FighterZ roster, which character was the true final boss of Dragon Ball FighterZ history? And alternatively, which characters were so bad that they needed years of balance patches just to get even remotely relevant? Everyone knows that this game had different sagas of some kind of character just villainizing the entire meta, but which of them can we call the real tyrant of Dragon Ball FighterZ? Well, that's what we're here to find out today. I went through tournament data for hours upon hours to rank every single character based on how well they did at major tournaments since this game came out, and throughout this game's life, there have been an insane amount of tournaments, from locals to giant majors with over 2,500 people. Going through every single tournament would be next to impossible unless I had a hyperbolic time chamber, so let me explain the rules that I used before you can make your guess for which characters were the best and the worst throughout this game's history. First of all, I looked at every tournament that was a part of Dragon Ball FighterZ World Tour across the years. If the tournament rewarded you any kind of World Tour points or just qualified you into the World Tour, it counted towards this list. I chose this for a few reasons. One, it makes it really easy to kind of group the tournaments into seasons because everyone's playing up to these World Tours. That's kind of like the finale of every year. That way I can go season by season so we can see how the game played out and which characters were dominating at different points but fell off over time. And number two, in pretty much every fighting game, the World Tour tends to be the kind of, season championships. Tournaments that help you qualify to these tours always get top players from around the world to fly out to them. On top of that, the other largest tournament of the year, like the Evos and whatnot, are usually always included in these anyway as a way to get points or to qualify into them. And even sometimes some small events from different regions were also included, which lets us get a wide scope of results to pull from. So, how are we going to rank all these characters? Well, if you've watched my videos where I've done similar things with Smash Bros, Street Fighter 6, and Guilty Gear, we're going to award points to the characters that make the top 8s of all of these big events. So finishing first will get you 8 points, finishing second will get you 7, and then we'll work our way down where the 8th place gets 1 point, but since there's a tie for 8th, we'll get 1.5 each. Then we will add up all the points to see which characters were appearing in and winning the most of these top 8 the most often, and which characters may have went an entire year or more without even sneaking into a single top 8. There are a few characters who get 0 points for some seasons. It's a little sad. Now, obviously this is not a perfect measure of strength for a character. Coming in 9th is obviously just impressive, and obviously winning some tournaments is harder than winning others, but in both cases the character only gets 8 points. We could use a weighted scoring system for the more stacked events, but our goal for the most part is to see which characters just show up the most, they dominate the most throughout the entire game's life, not just like the really big events. And I think most people universally agree that the top 8 of any event is usually like the celebrated finale or the last day. So I think it's a nice cutoff as we can see which characters we were watching the most on these championship Sundays. That being said though, since some events are kind of stacked, I will talk about which characters kind of peak the highest by winning these really big events as well. So even though we're not going to use like a weighted scale, I do want to mention some of the standouts. And yeah, overall this isn't meant to be some definitive tier list or anything. The character's popularity, the players themselves, and the choices they make on their characters, and many other factors will influence how often characters show up in top 8s and how often they're just winning. This is more of just a retrospective on the game's life. If you watch Dragon Ball FighterZ, if you're interested in it, which characters were showing up the most on these streams, which characters were winning these championship Sundays, and arguably the most important, which never showed up at all. So if we played that character, we could say we were working too hard. And obviously being a part of the base roster means you have the most time to earn points in this regard. But if there's something you do need to know about this game's history, they made sure the DLC characters get a little push to make sure that they can fast track and earn points faster. Well, some of them at least. So now that you know the rules and the context, it's time to take your guess on who do you think will be the best and the worst character throughout Dragon Ball FighterZ World Tour history. I really do read every comment and I love seeing people's guesses in videos like these, so let me know which characters you think will make the top 3 on either end when we finish going through every year. And while you're there, I would appreciate if you consider hitting that like and subscribe button. It really does help to support the channel, and videos like these take a lot of time just to even collect the data, let alone edit the video afterwards, so any support is really appreciated. And you can also become a member if you want to see videos like this earlier in the future, or if you just want to support. And with that out of the way, let's get right into it. Okay, so our journey begins with Dragon Ball FighterZ World Tour 2018 to 2019, and if you remember anything about this circuit, you'll know that it was a pretty funny one. The World Tour starts with CEO 2018 on July 1st, 2018, and it ends with the World Finals on January 27th, 2019. When it comes to the characters who were available, we have the entire base roster as well as Bardock and Broly, who came out in March of 2018, Zamasu and Vegito Blue, who come out in May, and then we have Base Vegeta and Goku, who join in by August, so it's a little bit after CEO when the tour really started. And then we have Cooler and Android 17 joined in September towards the end of this year, but they're still eligible to earn some points if they show up. And yeah, so this season's a little hilarious because of how the tour shapes up. It had a very thematic way to reach the finals, and I thought it sounded pretty funny in concept even back then. In order to make the World Finals, you would have to travel the world to earn one of the 7 Dragon Balls, you know, just like the show. So you'd earn a Dragon Ball by winning a specific major event, and then the 8th and the final spot would be decided by a LCQ, or last chance qualifier, on the day before the finals, in which anyone could come and try to earn that last spot, which means 8 people would qualify for the World Tour by the end of it. Enter Kazunoko, someone you can call the main character of this first arc. A legend in many fighting games that came even before DBFZ, and he has a strong start to the season. He manages to win the first Dragon Ball with his win at CEO 2018. The next 2 events are won by Sonic Fox and then Goichi, 2 of the legends of this game's history and one of the most iconic rivalries of the time. Hook Gang God manages to clutch up a 3-2 victory at Thunderstruck 2018 to win the 4-star Dragon Ball, and this is all looking pretty good, right? We have the thematic tie-in to the series of collecting Dragon Balls. We have our first 4 participants of the World Finals already chosen. 2 of them are from Japan, 2 of them are from the US, 3 more Dragon Balls left to collect. All we need to do is see who wins the next 3 Dragon Balls and then finally have our last chance qualifier. But we run into a little problem. A certain fused kid who likes to call a lot of ghosts and yell the names of his attacks, backed up by Yamcha Assist, is starting to dominate another major tournament. Kazunoko manages to win his 2nd Dragon Ball by winning SEA Major. This leaves us in a weird spot because now after the events that earn you a Dragon Ball are complete, we would need a 2nd last chance qualifier to fill out the 8 spots because now Kazunoko has taken up 2 of them. But wait, Kazunoko then goes on to win Japan Round 2018, his 3rd Dragon Ball, and essentially taking 3 of the top 8 spots for the World Finals. That's a little awkward. I guess we need to find a way to fit another qualifier into this before the World Finals starts, but it can't be that bad, right? It's just one guy won 3 of the Dragon Balls. Surely it can't get much worse. Kazunoko then wins the last Dragon Ball, taking up literally half of the spots. What an absolute god, by the way. His dominating performance were a blast to watch this early into the game's life, and he was doing it by kind of pioneering his own team rather than being like us mortals who kind of just joined the Cell Vegeta hype train and, you know, Bardock whenever he came out. Anyway, in order to make sure the World Finals actually had 8 competitors, this now meant that we had to have 4 different LCQ tournaments the day before the World Finals to determine who could get all the spots that Kazunoko stole. As you just heard there, it's not just one tournament in which the top 4 would advance. Nope, they decided to have 4 unique tournaments in which only the first place of each one would get in. So the winner would get into the finals, and then they would just start a whole nother tournament from scratch 3 more times. I don't know whose idea this was, but it was definitely an idea. Either way, it was very funny because Fenrich would get 2nd place at the very first tournament of the day, but that means he didn't qualify because only 1st place does. Then he goes on to play every single tournament all day. This guy must have played 50 plus tournament sets, but it was worth it as he wins the 4th and final LCQ of the day. And spoiler alert, he would go on to have an amazing day at the finals the next day, so it was all worth it at the end. Yeah, overall very funny year of how the format worked and the kind of disastrous outcome of 4 unique tournaments the day before the finals. So I wanted to contextualize it a bit, but now that that's out of the way, let's take a look at the actual characters. This year did not have an insane amount of tournaments compared to what we'll get in future years, but as you can see, we range from 3 characters getting 0 points to our top winner of the season, Bardock, getting over 125. And if you remember, getting 1st place gets you 8 points and tying for 7th gets you 1.5, so 125 is pretty good in the first year. I don't want to show everyone's exact points just yet, as it could spoil the winners and losers of our finale, so I split each character into tiers based on how many points they earn, just to give us a rough idea of the seasons as we go through them. If we take a look at the list, we see that all of Kazunoko's team did quite well, with Gotenks in 5th, Adult Gohan in 8th, and Yamcha in 9th for points earned this season. This is really impressive as Gotenks and Yamcha especially were not that popular at all throughout most of this year when I was going through the results, so a lot of these points are literally just because of him winning. Bardock and Cell are the obvious winners of this year. If you ask anyone who dominated the early seasons of DBFZ, Bardock is probably the first person to come to mind. He will also start our trend of DLC characters coming out and being a little too good. Super Saiyan Vegeta, Kid Buu, and Super Saiyan Goku all do incredibly well, rounding up our top 6. All 3 of these characters are very popular and fit on many of the strongest teams in the game. Keep an eye out on them in the years coming up to see if they can hold strong. And yeah, I'm not going to contextualize every character, but for the placements, if you're a listener of the video and you don't have it on your screen, we have Android 16 in 7th, Adult Gohan and Yamcha, who we talked about, and then Tien and Piccolo rounding up the tier of characters with 50 or more points. Then we had Ginyu, Android 18, Trunks, and Hit in the characters with more than 25 points but less than 50. And every other character in the base roster and the characters that came out in Season 1 that we talked about earlier had 24 points or less. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but the tiers are ordered, so the characters on the left of each tier had the highest of this year, so Bardock was our overall winner and Beerus was our lowest character to score points. Well, at least he did score some points, I guess, because actually Broly, Krillin, and Nappa, who all earned 0 points for the season, are our actual losers. Many of them actually placed in some Dragon Radar tournaments this year, which were kind of tournaments that earned you a free trip to a major that could win you a Dragon Ball. But in terms of the actual tournaments that were qualifiers for the World Finals themselves, none of these guys managed to make top 8 in the first year, which is a little bit surprising, especially for Broly, as he ends up being quite good. And yeah, every other character who was not mentioned was not released at this time, but Jiren and Videl would be right around the corner and would be released a few days after the World Finals. Kazunoko would go on to win the World Finals over Fenrich, a very fitting end for the guy who gathered up most of the Dragon Balls himself, and that would wrap up our year. So our biggest winners were Gotenks, Adult Gohan, and Yamcha. Even though Cell and Bardock were obviously the characters that we'd see the most throughout the year, and many people have memories of them being the strongest, it is pretty cool that a team that had none of them was kind of our big winner. I actually think besides Kazunoko, every single team that won one of these events had Bardock on the team except for Hook Gang God. But yeah, Bardock, Cell, and Super Saiyan Vegeta are extremely popular within these topics. And that wraps up the first year of Dragon Ball FighterZ competitive history. As this was the opening year, we had a very funny story with the format. I thought it'd be cool to contextualize it a bit, kind of go down memory lane, but for the sake of time, let's focus more on the results and the characters for the next years. So next up, we have the Dragon Ball FighterZ World Tour 2019 to 2020, which would once again start with CEO 2019 on June 30th, and it would end on February 9th, 2020 for the World Finals. With a new season, we get some new characters to join the roster over the year. Jiren, Videl, GT Goku, Janemba, Gogeta Blue, and Super Broly would all join over the course of this season. To qualify for the World Finals this time around, you would simply earn points by placing in any tournaments listed under the Saga and Tenkaichi tier events listed here, and the top 12 players with the most points at the end of the season would earn a spot into the World Finals. You could also guarantee a spot in the finals by winning any of these Saga tier events or the Last Chance qualifier. By the end of the year, 16 players would qualify for the World Finals, which is double last year's, which means there's a lot more events to go through. And yeah, I'm not going to go through every single tournament. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to focus more on the characters, but Goichi would go on to win the World Finals, with Fenrich coming second place for the second time in a row, which is kind of insane because he had that whole story of the Last Chance qualifiers going into second place and then another second place, which is pretty impressive and consistent. The only character that was shared between these two players' team was GT Goku. If we reveal the rest of the top 8, you can see that the young Goku appears on a lot of these teams, but so did Super Saiyan Goku. So let's pull up the entire list of characters to see how they did throughout the year leading up to this. Well, to no one's surprise, those two characters I mentioned were the most points and in a tier of their own. GT Goku was the only character to get more than 250 points, and besides him, Super Saiyan Goku was the only character to get more than 200 points. Bardock, our previous winner from last year, has another good year with a third place finish, and he was just shy of 200 points, and Kid Buu joins him in this tier. Both of these characters, especially Bardock, had really strong starts in the first year, so along with Super Saiyan Goku, they're all racking up quite a bit of points early into the game's life. So we'll see how they do down the line, as these three are kind of our front runners in points right now alongside the newcomer GT Goku. You know what, I'm going to spoil this a little bit because it's a little funny. In the first tier list, I didn't show exactly how many points above everyone Bardock was. Him and Cell were just in a tier of their own that was 125 plus. You know, for all we know, that could have went up to 700. But it wasn't actually anything crazy. Bardock had 145 points and Cell had 129. So even if I did name that tier 125 to 150, they would have naturally sat there anyway. But in this year, that's not the case. Goku sits at 250 plus because it's the last tier that fits here, but this year it's quite deceiving. He isn't between 250 and 300. He is multiple tiers above everyone else this year, and he sits at 373 points in his opening year. This little menace was everywhere in this season, and with this one showing alone, he is already the points leader despite missing an entire year. Anyway, as we continue down the list, we have Yamcha and Teen Gohan in the 100 to 150 tier. Yamcha has his second strong year in a row, while Teen Gohan is on the rise compared to last year. After that, we have Adult Gohan, Super Saiyan Vegeta, and Cell in the 50 to 100 range. These three characters dominated a lot of the early meta and got toned down a bit by this point, but they were clearly quite strong. In our last tier, we have every DLC character we talked about who is out by now, as well as the base roster characters who we have not mentioned so far. Z Broly leads the pack of this tier of characters from 1 to 49 points. It's a good showing for him after a rough start last year, and this tier goes all the way down to Videl. Notable showings in this tier are Gotenks, who was one of the best characters last year but fell off quite a bit. But finally, we have our characters with 0 points. We have Krillin and Nappa yet again. Sad day for the bald boys. But this time, they are joined by fellows Jiren, Beerus, Captain Ginyu, Super Broly, and Android 16. I do want to shout out Android 16 really quick. He didn't do particularly well in the first year either, but if you played like the very early days of Dragon Ball FighterZ before CEO when these world tours started, you may remember that he was actually one of the most insane characters ever on release, but he got nerfed very, very quick before he even had a chance to stack up some points. Hopefully he gets a little bit of that strength back and we'll see him in these tier lists in the later seasons. And yeah, with that, we have another year wrapped up. These first 2 years were a bit similar, but for the most part, a lot of the characters remained strong from last year to varying degrees, but we did get a major shakeup with a DLC character topping the list. I wonder if that is a trend that might continue. Now we run run into a bit of an issue. The 2020 to 2021 tour ends up getting cancelled since, you know, the entire planet was like on an extended patch maintenance for this time. And in the grand scheme of the game's history, this doesn't affect it to an insane degree because we still have many years before and after it of tournaments to pull from, but I do think this ends up screwing over some characters more than others. A few prime examples are the characters who were doing well in last year's list. Characters like G2 Goku, Super Saiyan Goku, and even Bardock and Kid Buu would go on to continue to do well in online tournaments for a while they were happening, until they would get nerfed and toned down over the course of that time period. The World Tour would not start back up until July of 2021, which is quite a large gap, and during this time, Kefla, UI Goku, Master Roshi, Super Baby 2, and Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta would all release. Of this group, I think UI Goku got scammed out of the points the hardest. He was incredibly strong on release and really took over the meta at this time, but it won't reflect in his points as there were no offline majors going on. Master Roshi also fits in this category. He was quite strong and getting picked up by many players once he got figured out, but he was also kind of robbed of a lot of points at the time as he got nerfed and a lot of people just lost interest in him by the time the World Tour came back. Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta is another example, but I think he's the least impacted. Even though he was incredibly strong on release, the World Tour would start back up just a few months after his release. Anyway, this leads Labco Android 21, oh my god, as the only unreleased character once the World Tour started. But she would get released before the World Championships that happened in July of 2022, which means she will only be eligible for one single event of this year. You gotta kind of feel bad for her, right? This is pretty much 3 years in a row worth of events where she is not even eligible to start earning a single point on our list. Compared to the crazy characters like Bardock, Cell, Super Saiyan Goku who have been here from the start, or GT Goku has a little bit of a late start but is already 300 points. How on earth can this pretty, humble, honest and balanced young lady ever dream of catching up on this list? I mean, it's just totally not fair for her. Maybe we should change some of the rules. So in this year, 16 players would qualify for the World Finals, which happened on July 17th, 2022. This year was a little weird because a lot of it was online, and let's say Dragon Ball FighterZ didn't have the greatest online experience, so the spots were earned regionally. On this list, you'll see 11 regions that were hosting tournaments. You could get points for playing in events in your region, and at the end of the year, there were offline tournaments for Japan, Europe, North America, and the top 4 of each of these events would qualify for the World Finals. The last 4 spots were players who were ranked first in regions 8 to 11, being Brazil, Mexico, Australia, and the Middle East. By the time the World Finals came around, these are the 16 players that would be competing in them, as well as the teams they used. In all honesty though, even though it felt like some of the format was a little scuffed and it was trying to make the most out of a bad situation with a pandemic happening alongside a game with not so great netcode, it actually ended up being a pretty hype year. Because so many players qualified within their own regions, we did not get to see a lot of people traveling and the best players playing each other throughout the year. In a lot of games when this happens, there's usually a rough idea of which region is the strongest, but as we can see the results now, the top 3 players of this World Finals were all from a different region, which was a really fitting conclusion from this worldwide regional leaderboard system. It really felt like some tournament of power where we were going to see how the strongest fighters from each universe kind of stack up against each other. Fenrich from Japan, who had back-to-back second places in the last 2 World Finals, would finish 3rd place in this one. It's pretty insane how consistently he has been amongst the top without ever actually winning one of these. Our 2nd place finisher was Nitro from the US, and then our winner was Wawa from France. A really cool showing from players across the world, but if I'm being honest, Wawa was built different throughout this entire event. He did not drop a single game in the top 8. As we can see for the top 8 teams, characters who are fused like the Vegetos and Gogetas are slowly starting to take over, as well as a certain someone who just recently came out by this point. She's already creeping up in this last event, but funnily enough, none of these characters were actually the point leaders of the entire season. The gap between the regional finals and the actual World Finals themselves was almost 7 months, so the meta actually did change quite a bit over the course of the season up to the World Finals. If we pull up our list for this year, we can see that overall this is one of the lowest total scoring points. For one, there are just more characters out now, so points are naturally distributed more, and secondly, there were less events overall because of the nature of recovering from the pandemic. And then Android 21 as well as UI Goku, who we talked about earlier, would actually come out to top our list. I think both of these characters could have got even more points if the previous year wasn't cancelled, but they did very well in this one. They would still appear in the World Finals, but most of their success was earlier into the season as well as the year the circuit was cancelled. Then we have Blue Vegeto and Kid Buu. I mentioned earlier that Vegeto Blue wasn't too happy with being low on the first few lists, and now we see him starting to take his rise. This is yet another year of Kid Buu doing really well on this list. He's been very consistently strong without ever topping any list, which is some good consistency. In our next tier with characters that have more than 50 points, we have Gogetas side by side. A good showing for Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta's first season. We have Broly, who continues to rise after his 0-point start in the first season. And then we have Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan Goku. Well, I'm never saying all that again. We have Goku Blue and Base Vegeta with their best seasons yet as well. Any character who is fused with Goku or has blue hair is having a good time, except him for now. Our next tier of 25 to 50 points, we have Kefla, Piccolo, Cell, Android 17, Hit, Base Goku, Jiren, and Beerus. This is a good start for Kefla's first eligible year, and a lot of the other characters have kind of been on the rise over time, or around this area. Cell's been around here or even higher in the past, and Jiren and Beerus are starting to kind of have a bit of a glow up. And then we have the rest of the characters, as you can see in our tier, for characters that have 1 to 24 points. I think some of the standouts are Gotenks, Adol Gohan, Bardock, and Yamcha, who have all had really good years in the past, and now we see them sitting near the bottom. A super standout is G2 Goku, who absolutely dominated our last list and is now the literal last place character to earn points, besides the character with, 0 points, I guess. And we have Krillin and Nappa finally starting to earn some points after multiple years of getting 0. Good job, boys. And in our tier with actually 0 points, we have a few surprises. Super Saiyan Goku and Super Saiyan Vegeta have been some of the most consistently strong characters in the game up until now, and now they have literally 0 points for this season. Master Roshi, who I talked about earlier, actually released in a pretty good spot, but by the time the tour started back up, most people had moved on after some nerfs. And then we have Super Broly and Goku Black, kind of just chilling here to no surprise. They're used to it. And that wraps up another year of Dragon Ball FighterZ. This was one of our more tame years, with the points being distributed fairly well throughout most of the cast. So let's move on to Dragon Ball FighterZ World Tour 2022 to 2023. This is kind of our biggest season yet in a few regards. For one, we have every character in the game's life has now been released. Well, technically that's not true anymore, as we now have a confirmed newcomer like 3 years later. But yeah, as we mentioned, Lapco 21 came out towards the end of last season, so she will now be fully eligible for the entire year. These are the tournaments that would be covered, and the last chance qualifier would award 2 spots. Instead of having 2 completely different tournaments like our original year, just the top 2 placers of this LCQ would get into the finals. Wade from France would go on to win the LCQ after not qualifying throughout the normal season, and very similar to Fenrich's first year, Wade would go from winning an LCQ to making the grand finals of the World Tour the very next day. And in the most anime-like story arc ever, very fitting for a game based on Dragon Ball, his opponent in the grand finals would be none other than Fenrich himself. The guy with a very similar result when it comes to qualifying to these world tours from the LCQ, but also the guy who has never actually won one of these yet, despite being so consistent. And let me tell you, it really ended up being as anime as it gets. In winners finals, Fenrich is actually the one who beat Wade and sent him to losers bracket in a very dominating 3-0 victory. Wade goes on to win the losers bracket, makes his way back to Fenrich, where he gets his revenge with his own 3-0 dominating victory. It's like he found a senzu bean down there and he's just ready for Fenrich a second time, I don't know. Anyway, now both players are in losers after beating each other 3-0 at this tournament, and what could have happened but a Game 5 banger of a set. In Game 5, both players are down a character, with the 2 remaining characters already being beat up quite a bit. Fenrich gets a beautiful cross-up on Wade's Lapcoat 21 and spends all the meter he's been saving up since Season 1 to make sure this character does not get back up for the rest of this season. Wade's Janemba is in, and Fenrich actually lands the hit, but it drops only to get another hit that doesn't get the job done. But finally, he clocks Janemba on the head, and after years and years of doing well at these tournaments but never winning the finals, Fenrich gets his first World Finals victory. It was honestly a super enjoyable event to watch. So how did our entire list shape up for this year? Well, Labcoat sits at the top of this list in her own tier that I'm just going to call Labcoat tier for now. She was pretty crazy. I thought it'd be fun to make it a little mysterious exactly how many points or what tier of points she's in. Because she was so late to the party, I'm curious if you think she has enough time to catch up to kind of our big breadwinners in the earlier seasons. Anyway, our next 2 characters who had more than 250 points were the Blue Fusions. We have Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan Vegito, why did I say it again? In second place, and Super Saiyan God's Blue Gogeta in third. Funny enough, we have 2 full gaps of tiers that should go to show you just how dominant these 3 characters were this season. It was rare to see a team that didn't have one, if not all of them. But getting more than 100 points is still a really strong showing in the context of the entire list that we'll see at the end. And in this tier, we have Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta and Android 21, the base pink one, not the one that just gets way better by putting on a coat. In our 500 to 99 tier, still a respectable showing, we have Janemba, Hit, Android 17, Blue Goku, and Teen Gohan. This is Janemba's best showing to date, and these other characters have all been on the rise or have been about this level for quite a while. In our last tier, we have UI Goku leading the pack, and pretty much every character left down to Majin Buu, who was our lowest point earner out of the characters who actually earned points. As you can see here, most of the cast is in this last tier who got less than 50 points, so I don't think it's a stretch to call this the least balanced season we've had so far. But to me, the funniest part is actually the 0 points tier. We have Bardock and Kid Buu, some of the best starts you could ask for in any game, consistently being either the best of the best like Bardock or amongst the top for years on end like Kid Buu, and now they have literally 0 points. I understand getting nerfed and just being less popular, but to have literally 0 is pretty insane after most of the player base already learned these characters to some point and just no one decided to keep them on their teams. The patch notes must have made them pay for their sins. GT Goku is also very low, but he's starting to get some points back, and Super Saiyan Goku and Super Saiyan Vegeta, who had also been very strong, are still near the bottom, but at least they're getting some points. And that's it for this year. Quite a fun year in terms of watching the actual finals play out, but not the most fun in terms of the character diversity and strength. Do not worry though, these top 3 characters would all get nerfed, and some are pretty heavy-handed nerfs, which were very funny. Like, they would literally just make your team gain less meter if they existed on your team. Of course, their actual kits would also get some nerfs on top of that. And if we've seen anything from Bardock or GT and UI Goku that came before, sometimes these nerfs can make you tumble down the list as fast as the very next season. So let's check out that next season. After coming off a very big year for the game, if I'm being honest, this is where the momentum starts to drop the hardest. The game finished with its DLC cycle. Well, not anymore, as we found out. And didn't have any announcements to keep the audience intrigued to the same degree, so a lot of these competitors who are sticking it out are really in it for the love of the game. They were the most dedicated players, but there are less events overall. The World Finals had 12 spots, down from 16 for players this time around, and players could qualify by winning or gaining points from these 12 events. These are the 12 players who would go on to qualify for the World Finals. Wade actually enters Grand Finals from winner's side this time around, but fell short to Hikari, who would go on to win 2 straight sets in a row and take the championship. And these were the characters used by the 12 players in this World Finals. As you can see, we still have the blue-haired boys doing quite well, and even our Season 1 meta definer of Cell has started to rise back up. If I'm being honest, he's probably my favorite character throughout this game's life, mostly because his intro was just way too hype, but he was fun to watch and play as well. Anyway, you might notice one thing. Remember how I mentioned a certain character would receive quite a few nerfs, even some very heavy-handed ones? Well, yeah, she's still on half of the teams in this picture, as you can see. That being said, she's not on the winning team or the 3rd or 4th place team, so maybe throughout the entire season she wasn't that crazy, right? Nope, once again, she holds her own tier. Not only is she the only character to get more than 100 points in this short season, she got more than 150 points. 2 tiers below her, we have Super Saiyan Gogeta as our 2nd place finisher, and Cell in the tier with him as the only other 2 characters to get more than 75 points during this short season. Leading the next tier of characters with more than 50 points, we had Android 17 and 18 back-to-back, which is kind of cool. I think this is Android 18's best season, despite her being in the game since initial release. Jiren is also on the rise. Gogeta Blue is still putting in work. Kefla, Adel Gohan, and Hit had already been relatively great, depending on the season. And we have Blue Vegeta's best showing so far. Fierce is also doing well for himself. And most of the other characters who have been staple around this area are still here. Vegeta Blue trended down this season quite a bit, but Nappa is on the rise after his slow start. And our last tier is also very common entries around this region. Kid Buu and Bardock are starting to get some points back after a rough last season, and I don't think there's anything relatively crazy throughout the rest of this tier. But I do think this is Super Broly's first time getting any points, if I remember correctly. Good stuff to him. And then lastly, we have Majin Buu, Android 16, Yamcha, Master Roshi, and Super Saiyan Goku, who are all in our 0-point tier. Kind of funny because all these characters were like really good at some point besides Majin Buu. Android 16 was too early for his own good. Master Roshi was kind of a rough time, but it's funny to see all these guys sitting at 0 now. And with that, another year is complete. This year has had a shortage of points overall as there were just less events. And besides a certain character who has been nerfed quite hard, taking a lot of the points, the point spread overall was, pretty well spread out. So let's hop into our final season and wrap this all up by seeing who won overall. We have Dragon Ball FighterZ World Tour 2024 to 2025. This season is actually quite a bit bigger than last one, which is pretty cool. We have 16 people qualifying for the finals again, and that would happen over the course of these 17 tournaments. There was originally a last chance qualifier, which unfortunately had to be cancelled due to the LA wildfires. So instead, the winner of EVO would take the last spot alongside the 15 players with the most points by the end of the year. So EVO kind of acted as our last chance qualifier. These are the 16 players and the teams that they were using to get here, and honestly, just at first glance, this meta actually does seem pretty cool. Obviously, some characters are more popular than others, but there are quite a large pool of characters that qualify to the finals, and a lot of these characters had been historically bad on our previous lists, like Trunks, Vegeta Blue, Videl, Nappa, and a few others. Now, we've had a tradition that's come up a few times where the winner of the LCQ goes on to make grand finals, but unfortunately, as we mentioned, there was no LCQ, but the person who ended up getting that spot for winning EVO is Inzen, and he holds that tradition anyway by getting the spot from EVO and then also making grand finals of the World Tour. Inzen would go on to play against Hikari in the grand finals, and honestly it was a very hype set. Inzen was coming in hot, where he won EVO, which by the way he also did by beating Hikari in the grand finals, and Hikari was our reigning champion from last year. No one has ever won this tournament twice, let alone back-to-back years. As is tradition in hype Dragon Ball FighterZ sets, this would go on to be a Game 5 banger, but Hikari would go on to dominate that Game 5, winning it with all 3 of his characters still alive, going on to not only be the first person to win 2 of these World Championships, but to do it back-to-back, insanely impressive. Also really cool about this grand finals is that not a single character overlapped between the two teams. I also personally love Inzam's team as it was the exact team I used in season 1. So it was cool to see it doing so much work years later after I was mostly just watching the game and haven't been playing much myself. Anyway, our top 8 teams would look like this, and once again, it looks pretty dope if I'm being honest. A lot of variety and a lot of characters we didn't get to see earlier in the game's life. But how did the rest of the season play out? We had quite a few tournaments before this, so let's check out those results. And honestly, the first thing a lot of people will probably notice is that Labco 21 is still at the top. But to be honest, the coolest thing for me is how balanced the overall points distribution finally is. Not a single character scored above 150 points, and only 2 characters scored 0 points this time around. Once again, it's pretty funny that it's Kid Buu and Yamcha, as they were like absolute staples in the early years of this game's life that we already went through, but yeah. Our 125 to 150 tier is Labcoat 21, Jiren, and Cell with a return to form. Adult Gohan also has a rise back up, and he is the only character in the 100 to 124 range. In our 75 to 99 point range, we have Android 17 leading the group. Blue Vegito remaining great despite Bandai Namco's best efforts. Nappa continues to be on the rise. He has been getting better and better over these seasons. We have Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta, who has remained near the top in pretty much every season since his release. And then Janemba and Super Baby 2. And yeah, I'm not going to go into every character as we can see the list here, but some other characters that I found cool was that Super Broly had his best season. Bardock and GT Goku near the bottom again is funny just because of the damage they did earlier on. And UI Goku as well as Super Saiyan Goku both have pretty bad showings relative to how good they've been in the past. And that is a complete retrospective of every season of competitive Dragon Ball FighterZ for the World Tour's history. We've seen some amazing storylines not only from some of the characters' trajectory but just the players themselves, and honestly there's even more that I just don't have time to go over in this video, but maybe that could be a video in the future. We've seen some characters be the literal best in one season and 0 points in other seasons, while some other characters just had very steady rises and falls. And yeah, this is just a game I look back on very fondly. Even when I wasn't interested in playing it, I was always watching every major because it's just such a pretty game with some of the coolest moments and characters on display at all times. But now that we've wrapped up all these seasons, we can get into the finale of the entire video. Although we went year by year, the main goal of this video was to see how these characters ranked throughout the entire game's life. So let's add up all the scores from every season and rank every single character's performance throughout the game's history to find out who has been the best character in Dragon Ball FighterZ history and who has been the worst. So at the start of the video, I asked you to try to guess which characters would be on the lowest part of this list, and well, it was kind of a blowout for these 3. There are 3 characters that did not even manage to get 50 points throughout the entire game's history. At last place, we have Majin Buu with only 17.5 points. Just barely above him, we have Master Roshi at 22 points. We talked about him earlier and his unfortunate timing. And then our last character to not make the 50-point mark was Super Broly at 48.5 points. In our next tier of characters with 50 to 99 points, we had Base Goku, who has 73 points, and Trunks, who had 88 points, which rounds up our bottom 5 characters. After that, we had Videl at 95.5 points, Krillin at 96 points. Kind of surprising to me, I kind of expected him to be in the bottom 5, but he did pick it up by the end. We have Goku Black at 98.5 points as well. In our next tier of characters that had more than 100 points, we have Cooler, who has 111.5 points, Frieza with just 0.5 more points than him, which is kind of funny. And just barely more than that, we had Zamasu at 112.5, and then Piccolo at 121, and Captain Ginyu rounds out this tier with 125.5 points. In our next tier, we have Vegeta Blue and Nappa tied at 151 points. Both of these characters were on the rise in the later years of the game's life, so maybe they could have kept going up. We have Android 16, who has 152 points. Base Vegeta has 154.5. Z Broly has 156.5 points, which is pretty good considering he started with 0 in his first season. Goku Blue has 158.5. Super Baby 2 would have 160.5 points, which is also not telling the full story as he ends up being very good after these tournaments, but there's no World Tour currently going on. Beerus was at 180, very similar story, he's been very good recently. UI Goku is at 182.5. Yamcha sits at 194.5 points, not too bad considering he started off incredibly strong. And you heard it here first, Yamcha clears UI Goku. Anyway, rounding off this entire tier is Kefla at 198.5, who joined relatively late but had some solid showings in every year after. And for characters who are above 200, we have Tien at 202. Pretty cool because he was under the radar in pretty much every patch but consistently got some points here and there. Gotenks and Android 18 tied at 219 points each. Hit had 221.5 points, and he kind of just always got a decent amount of points but was never really too high or too low, kind of just chilling, pretty good. Janemba had 228, Jiren had 238.5, and that finishes this tier. For characters at 250 or more points, we had Android 17 who starts it off at 262.5. Super Saiyan Vegeta had 265, a good showing overall, but seeing as how strong he started, it was a bit of a fall off. And then we had Teen Gohan at 274. And now we have 11 characters left, and all of these have more than 300 points. At number 11, we have Android 21, the pink one, at 326 points, a very strong showing overall. And for our top 10, at number 10, we have Super Saiyan Goku starting it off. As we talked about a few times, Super Saiyan Goku had such a consistent start only to end up in the gutter towards the end, but ending the game with a top 10 showing is still very good overall. In a similar boat, we have Kid Buu at 343 points for our number 9 character. An extremely strong and consistent start, and somehow he ended up in the 0 tier by the end. But if you were that good for so many years, then that's enough to place in the top 9. Funnily enough, in a very similar situation, we have a character with literally 2 more points than him, and our number 8 character is Bardock. I'm actually very surprised he was this low given how strong of a start he had and just my memories of how good and popular he was, but it makes sense in hindsight as there were like many years after he got nerfed and even more tournaments in some of the later years. Our next character does not follow a similar story and kind of came relatively late but remained really good the entire time. Our number 7th most successful character in Dragon Ball FighterZ World Tour history is Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta with 346 points. That rounds up the characters with less than 350 points. We only have one character who is in the 350 to 399 tier, and that is Adult Gohan. Honestly, it's a little bit of a surprise to me. Not like a big one because everyone knows he was a great character in many different metas, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm surprised to see him above some of the characters we already talked about like Bardock and Kid Buu because I felt like his peak didn't quite reach as high. But he was so consistently good throughout many years, so it does make sense. And in our next tier, we have one single character in the 400 to 450 tier, and that is GT Goku. This guy had an absolutely insane start, but it was almost too good of a start, which led him to be nerfed really hard and then end up near the bottom of the barrel for the rest of the game's life. In our next tier of characters who are in the 450 to 499 range, we only have 2 characters in here. Our number 4 character of our list, who is the highest ranking character from the base roster of Dragon Ball FighterZ, only to be outdone by the pay-to-win strategies that Bandai hit us with. We have Perfect Cell with 471 points. I already talked about this guy earlier. He's one of my favorite characters to watch, and his scream for his intro might be the most iconic part in this entire game. I'm very happy he made it this high, and honestly, if it was up to me, I wish he would have even topped the list. He was a very iconic character throughout the game's life for many different reasons. And for our top 3, you may have already guessed it at this point, our 3rd best character with 478 points, barely passing Cell after an insane stretch throughout the last few years of the game's life. We have Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan Gogeta. I had to say it in full out of respect, you know, it's a top 3. He came out a little later than most of the characters on this list, but still objectively had an insane showing throughout the game's life, earning himself a spot in our top 3, and can you guess who's right next to him? In our next tier with 533.5 points, we have Blue Vegito. This guy took the second half of this game's life by storm. He had a little bit of a slow start, but as soon as his strength was figured out, so many people were rushing to add this guy to their team, and for good reason. But we really can't talk about a character who pops off in the later periods of this game without talking about our winner. But first we must go up a tier to the 550 to 600 range. Wait, no, we gotta go up even higher to the 600 to 650 tier. Wait, that's still not enough. What about characters that got over 700 points? Much better, there we go. Our character who is literally the last character to be added to the game and therefore had the least time to get points. We have the most broken character in DBFZ history, Labco 21. Honestly, it's a little fitting as she's a character created for the game, right? She's like original character, not from the anime, until they randomly showed her in that movie, which was like actually kind of cool. And with an insane 747 points, over 200 more than our second place, no other character really stood a chance. I really wanted to not make it obvious just how high above she was every other character by not showing the number each year and just putting her in her own tier. I thought to myself, surely some people will believe that she just didn't have enough time to catch up to the characters that had like 3 years of tournaments before her, but nope, I doubt that worked. She was just so insanely dominant and honestly a character that could fit on any team. You can just add her in, and even had tournaments where almost every single person in the top 8 had her on their team. And yeah, that's our list. If we remove the DLC, the 3 best characters who were from the game from launch were Cell, Adult Gohan, and Kid Buu in that order, followed by Super Saiyan Goku and Android 21 rounding up the top 5. I feel like a lot of people probably could have guessed that top 5 of base roster characters, but maybe Super Saiyan Vegeta had a more lasting impression for some people. And out of nowhere, we got an announcement for Super Saiyan 4 Daima Goku, as well as some competitive events coming up, so who knows what the future of competitive Dragon Ball FighterZ holds. Make sure to subscribe to see some new DBFZ stuff in the future. As I mentioned before, I loved this game, so I'd love to make more videos as we're actually getting new content for it in the big 2026. Who would have guessed? If you did enjoy this video, check out this video I made with a similar format about Guilty Gear Strive, and I have others for competitive Smash Bros and Street Fighter 6 as well on my channel. Thanks again for watching, and stay beautiful, my friends.